What if I told you Formula One's great technical revolution has turned into its biggest failure? What if I told you overtaking, the soul of racing, is collapsing before our very eyes? What if I told you the FIA promised us more wheel-to-wheel action, and instead delivered the dullest races in decades? And what if I told you that this ground effect era is now officially the biggest scandal in modern F1? The 2022 regulation reset was marketed as the dawn of a golden age for Formula One. By shifting aerodynamic reliance from wings to the car's underfloor tunnels, the FIA promised closer battles, reduced turbulence, and overtaking that would once again define the sport. Fans were told that following within 2 car lengths would no longer punish the chasing driver. Engineers like Ross Brawn described it as a breakthrough comparable to the invention of DRS in 2011. 3 years later, that optimism has turned into bitter disillusionment. The very rules intended to save racing have instead created a processional nightmare where speed no longer guarantees a pass and strategy often matters less than track position. What was sold as liberation has become shackles. The heart of the scandal lies in how quickly teams dismantled the FIA's theoretical models. By 2021, cars were losing more than 50% of their downforce when tucked into another's slipstream. The new ground effect regulations reduced that loss to about 20% in simulations, and the first season looked encouraging. But Formula One is not a static laboratory. Engineers discovered new wing edge geometries, vortex generators, and floor tricks that recreated the very turbulence these rules were designed to eliminate. By 2025, Nicolas Tambatzis admitted publicly that the figure had risen back to 35%. It was the clearest confession yet, the solution had collapsed, and the dirty air nightmare was back. The consequence is visible in the numbers, and numbers do not lie. In 2023, fans enjoyed 858 overtakes. 1 year later, despite a longer calendar, overtakes fell to 788. That means an average of 33 passes per race, compared to 39 the year before. This 16% decline is not just a statistic, it is a death sentence for spectacle. In Azerbaijan 2025, a track famous for chaos and slipstream battles, only 24 overtakes occurred across 51 laps, 7 of them under restart conditions. Once racing resumed, the field froze. Even Ferrari and McLaren, cars with genuine speed advantage, could not cut through the midfield. Pure pace was no longer a weapon. For drivers, the return of turbulence is not just frustrating, it is physically punishing. Gabriel Bortolito explained he cannot even keep his helmet steady on the straights when following another car. The airflow violently shakes his head side to side, creating exhaustion before opportunities even appear. Nico Hülkenberg echoed the same sentiment: the car becomes undrivable in traffic. These are not rookies complaining out of inexperience. They are professionals confronting physics that should have been resolved by design. Dirty air has become so intense that some drivers deliberately hang back to preserve tires and stability, effectively giving up on racing in order to survive. What was meant to enhance safety and spectacle is now jeopardizing both. Compounding the disaster is the collapse of DRS, the system that once guaranteed excitement. Ground effect cars use much smaller rear wings, generating less drag to begin with. Opening a slot gap has minimal effect, especially on circuits like Monza, where slipstreaming is tradition. Andrew Shovlin of Mercedes admitted that in 2025 DRS had practically no effect. That statement is devastating. If the temple of speed can no longer deliver train-breaking overtakes, then no venue can. The sport is now witnessing the paradox of technical progress. More efficient aerodynamics have created cars impossible to catch or pass, reducing F1's gladiatorial essence to a qualifying contest extended over race distance. Fans wanted a fight, they got a stalemate. What makes all this a true scandal is not just that the rules failed. It is that the FIA underestimated the team's relentless ingenuity. The governing body promised to neutralize loopholes, yet by year 3, the same loopholes are shaping the championship again. Fans are angry because they feel deceived. Drivers are angry because the cars are harder to race than ever. And engineers are angry because every mid-season technical directive has destabilized development without solving the underlying issues. Formula One stands at a crossroads: either admit the ground effect era has failed, or risk alienating the very supporters who keep the sport alive. And here is the sting in the tail: this collapse is only the beginning. When the FIA unveiled the 2022 regulation package, the message was crystal clear: Formula One had found the cure to its overtaking disease. The ground effect philosophy, dormant since the late 70s and early 80s, was resurrected with a promise that drivers could follow nose-to-tail without losing control. The numbers looked persuasive. Cars in 2021 would lose over half of their aerodynamic grip when tucked within 2 car lengths of a rival. Under the new rules, that loss was forecast to drop dramatically to only 20%. The dream scenario was that fans would see a revival of constant wheel-to-wheel fights, the kind of duels that defined the golden eras of Mansell, Senna, and Schumacher. Engineers spoke of a revolution. Fans believed them. Commentators framed it as the rebirth of pure racing. And for a brief moment, it looked like the revolution was real. That fragile optimism collapsed almost as quickly as it arrived. By the middle of the first season, teams were already pushing the rulebook's gray areas. Formula One engineers are masters of interpretation, and once they discovered how to manipulate vortex creation and airflow management, the illusion shattered. Instead of staying within the spirit of the regulations, clever solutions on wing tips, floor edges, and diffuser strakes began to recreate precisely the kind of turbulent wake the FIA was trying to eliminate. The governing body's models, based on computational fluid dynamics simulations, had assumed compliance. What they failed to anticipate was innovation directed against the very heart of the rulebook. Within 3 years, the situation had deteriorated so badly that Tombatsis himself admitted the dirty air penalty had risen back to 35%, almost erasing the entire gain of the regulation reset. That admission was a bombshell because it confirmed what fans had been feeling all season: the races looked no different, and in some cases, even worse. The cars were technically faster, more efficient, and more stable in isolation, but in traffic they became stubborn, unyielding machines that punished any attempt to chase closely. The FIA had promised cars that could fight. What fans received were cars that required perfect track position to have any chance of progress. Worse still, this regression arrived without warning. Teams had effectively outsmarted the regulations before the FIA had time to respond with new directives, leaving a championship distorted by an uneven playing field and a rulebook that looked outdated only 3 years after it was introduced. The promise of 2022 had become the betrayal of 2025. For the drivers, the disappointment is more than theoretical, it is visceral. They were sold a vision where their talent and bravery could shine in combat. Instead, they are stuck in processions, nursing tires in the turbulent air, and unable to attack unless a rival makes a rare mistake. When Carlos Sainz compared the current situation to 2020 or 2021, he was acknowledging that 4 years of innovation had effectively gone in reverse. For Lewis Hamilton, transitioning to Ferrari, the frustration is constant. "I was trapped in dirty air behind slower cars," he said, voicing the frustration of a champion reduced to watching the laps tick away. For Max Verstappen, more measured in his criticism, the concession was subtle but sharp: "The problem is you're always running in dirty air." These are not isolated gripes, they are the collective verdict of the grid. And here lies the mini call to action for you, the fans who understand what racing should be. If you were standing in the shoes of the FIA, what would you choose? Would you impose mid-season crackdowns, knowing they would anger teams but potentially save the racing? Or would you allow the engineers to exploit every loophole, even if it transforms Formula One into a sport where overtaking is as rare as rain in Bahrain? This is the broken promise laid bare. It is not just a technical failure, it is a philosophical one. Formula One promised closer battles. What we got was a reminder that in this sport, engineers always win the fight against the rulebook. The most damning evidence of the ground effect era's failure does not come from opinion, but from cold, unforgiving numbers. In 2023, across a full calendar, fans were treated to 858 overtakes. A year later, with 2 additional races on the schedule, that number plummeted to 788. The raw average fell from 39 overtakes per race to just under 33. That is a 16% drop in passing opportunities in a sport where a single clean overtake can define a Grand Prix. This is not statistical noise, it is a collapse in competitiveness. For a championship that markets itself as the pinnacle of motorsport, fewer overtakes means fewer moments of drama, fewer reasons to lean forward in the chair, and ultimately fewer reasons for fans to believe that on-track action still matches the hype. The disaster is magnified when you look at individual races. Consider Azerbaijan 2025, a track famous for its chaos, endless slipstreaming, and unpredictable results. With a straight measuring 2.2 kilometers, the longest on the calendar, Baku should have been a safe haven for overtaking. Instead, across 51 laps, only 24 overtakes were recorded, and 7 of those came during the artificial reset of a red flag restart. Once the racing resumed under green, the field locked into position. Even Ferrari and McLaren, cars with pace and straight-line advantage, could not slice through the pack. The message was clear: in 2025, speed is not enough. If a car starts behind, it tends to stay behind. That turns racing into a glorified time trial where track position is everything, and drama evaporates. Japan painted an even bleaker picture. Suzuka has always been a notoriously difficult track for overtaking, but fans expected the ground effect rules to alleviate at least some of that problem. Instead, the air turbulence proved so aggressive that drivers backed off deliberately to avoid overheating their tires. This meant the race unfolded with barely any position changes, turning one of the most iconic circuits in the world into a chess game where no pieces moved. Tire management became the defining factor, not racing instinct. Drivers admitted privately that chasing a rival too closely would destroy their tires long before any passing opportunity arose. For spectators, this transforms anticipation into disappointment, a long wait for action that never arrives. For Formula One's credibility, it is a warning sign that regulation has strangled the show. What makes this decline so frustrating is that the sport has become a victim of its own technical excellence. Cars are faster, lighter, and more aerodynamically efficient than ever before. Yet these very qualities reduce the aerodynamic hole left behind, which once gave the chasing car a fighting chance. Andrew Shovlin of Mercedes confirmed the problem: the slipstream effect has shrunk to almost nothing, and even DRS is losing relevance because there is no drag left to destroy. Paradoxically, the better the engineers make the cars, the harder they are to pass on track. Fans might marvel at the technology, but when that technology erases wheel-to-wheel combat, it erodes the essence of the sport. Engineering brilliance has pushed Formula One into a paradox: perfect cars that create imperfect racing. And here is the sting: this trend is not leveling off, it is accelerating. Each season, as development converges and aerodynamics become ever more refined, overtaking opportunities shrink further. The fear is that by the time the 2025 season closes, the average number of overtakes will hit modern-era lows not seen since before DRS was introduced. For a sport that thrives on narrative, this is catastrophic. Fans do not tune in for processions, they tune in for drama, chaos, and the moments when bravery overcomes physics. If engineering continues unchecked, Formula One risks turning into a sterile exhibition of speed, rather than the theater of combat that made it legendary. The question is whether the FIA has the courage or the ability to act before the crisis becomes irreversible. When the drag reduction system was introduced in 2011, it was hailed as the savior of Formula One's racing spectacle. By simply opening a slot in the rear wing, cars could shed drag, gain speed, and attempt daring overtakes that would have been impossible in the years of pure dirty air. For more than a decade, it worked. Circuits like Monza and Spa became arenas of strategic cat and mouse, with slipstreaming and DRS combining to deliver breathtaking passes. But in 2025, that weapon has gone blunt. The modern ground effect cars generate most of their downforce from the floor, not the wing. Rear wings are now smaller, sleeker, and produce far less drag to begin with. When the flap opens, there is simply not enough resistance to destroy. The result is devastating. DRS, once the great equalizer, has become little more than a flashing light on the steering wheel. The collapse of DRS was made most visible at Monza, the one track where it should always matter. The Temple of Speed has historically delivered slipstream battles that echo through the sport's history: Villeneuve versus Arnoux, Schumacher versus Häkkinen, Hamilton versus Raikkonen. But in 2025, those duels never materialized. Andrew Shovlin of Mercedes admitted bluntly, DRS had practically no effect. On the longest straights in Formula One, with the best chance for overtaking, the system failed. Cars lined up in trains, faster machines stuck behind slower ones with no way to use their speed advantage. For fans watching at home, it was a moment of disbelief. If Monza cannot deliver action with DRS, what hope does any other circuit have? The tool that once broke up processions has now become powerless against the very cars it was meant to tame. The implications of DRS decline are enormous. Overtaking was never just about excitement, it was about strategy, rhythm, and psychology. A driver who knew he could deploy DRS had the incentive to stay close, to keep pushing, to mount an attack. Without that weapon, the risk versus reward calculation has changed. Now, chasing drivers must manage overheating tires, turbulent airflow, and shrinking battery reserves without the carrot of a guaranteed pass. The sport has slid back to an era where qualifying position dictates race outcome, with Sunday afternoon serving as an extended confirmation of Saturday's results. For a global audience promised the pinnacle of racing, this feels like betrayal. It is not just the drivers who are frustrated, it is the fans who are being robbed of the gladiatorial battles they were told to expect. And the tragedy is that this collapse was predictable. By shifting the emphasis to ground effect, the FIA inevitably reduced the importance of wings. Smaller wings meant less drag. Less drag meant DRS would have less air resistance to cut through. The dominoes were obvious, yet the governing body seemed surprised when the system failed. Instead of acknowledging that the design philosophy doomed DRS, mid-season directives have tried to patch the problem with minor tweaks to detection zones and usage windows. These are sticking plasters on a broken system. Fans can see it, drivers can feel it, and teams cannot ignore it. The once mighty DRS has fallen, and with it, Formula One has lost one of its last safeguards against processional racing. When Formula One reintroduced ground effect in 2022, one of the most terrifying side effects was the violent vertical bouncing known as porpoising. At high speeds, airflow under the floor would stall and reattach in cycles, causing the car to slam against the track surface like a jackhammer. Teams and drivers fought through headaches, bruised spines, and blurred vision until emergency technical directives helped stabilize the situation. By late 2023, many believed the nightmare had been solved. But in 2025, porpoising is back with a vengeance. Ferrari's updates this year triggered a resurgence of the phenomenon, and Carlos Sainz admitted the problem had hammered the team on circuits like Barcelona and Austria. The oscillation is not just uncomfortable, it robs the car of top speed, destabilizes braking, and punishes the driver physically in a way no simulator can replicate. The return of porpoising exposes the fragility of the current regulations. To chase maximum downforce, cars are run lower and stiffer than ever before, sometimes scraping within millimeters of the asphalt. Any shift in floor geometry or suspension settings can reintroduce the bouncing cycle. Ferrari's dilemma shows the trade-off clearly: lower the car for peak cornering grip and risk brutal porpoising, or raise the car to survive straights but sacrifice lap time. Sainz described the compromise bluntly: "We cannot lower the car as much as we want, otherwise the porpoising is back." That admission reveals just how narrow the performance window has become. Fans may see a sleek, stable machine on television, but inside the cockpit, the driver is wrestling a car that can violently lose balance with no warning at 200 miles per hour. What makes the resurgence even more worrying is the role of new FIA directives. In 2025, the governing body tightened tolerances on flexible wings, reducing allowable deflection from 15 mm to 10. On paper, this was about fairness and safety. In practice, it forced teams to redesign their wings and adjust their aero balances mid-season. These changes, combined with ground effect floors already pushed to extremes, have destabilized some packages and made porpoising reappear. Engineers now fear the directive may have unintentionally created a cascade of problems. The irony is brutal: rules designed to limit risk have actually reintroduced one of the sport's most dangerous traits. Instead of steady progress, Formula One has once again been dragged into a cycle of firefighting, where each regulatory patch risks opening another wound in the fabric of the sport. Porpoising is more than an inconvenience, it is a direct threat to safety. When a car is bouncing violently at over 200 miles per hour, the driver's vision blurs, braking distances extend, and the chassis is subjected to stresses far beyond its design limits. Lewis Hamilton once described the early porpoising years as the most painful experience I've had in a car. Now, with the problem reappearing in 2025, drivers face the same risks all over again. For a sport that prides itself on being the pinnacle of technology, watching cars physically hammer their own drivers into submission is not just embarrassing, it is unacceptable. Fans may tolerate slower cars or tighter grids, But no one wants to see champions put in harm's way by a problem the FIA already claimed to have solved.